Hi all. We are back to continue our conversation about facilitation in this module. One of the most daunting things for new facilitators is trying to figure out what to do when things go wrong. Like, we can make all our design decisions and have our ground rules or communication agreements and get people on board, and that's great, we're feeling pretty good. But what happens if people get angry with each other or they don't want to follow the ground rules? What do we do if the old conversation pattern that we're trying to change keeps happening? This is when facilitators have to intervene. This is when the tough stuff happens, right? And even though I've been facilitating groups for a long time, it continues to be one of the most challenging things about this work. So let me give you a few examples. Many years ago, I was co-facilitating a community meeting about the future of our local farmers market. Everybody loves a farmers market. It just was at a point where I had to make some decisions about how to change, right? New location, new features, etc. So people from the market, the city government, members of the community came together to create a vision for this new location and new features and all this stuff. Overall, the meeting went really well. At the end of the session, which had been several hours long, at the end of the market, so folks are kind of tired, we were doing the circle process. Everybody sits in a big circle of chairs, and each person said one or two words about what they were taking away from the day. Literally one or two words. This is basic stuff. It's kind of a thing that we might do to close out a session in a lot of different circumstances. When we were most of the way around the circle, we got to the mayor, who, instead of just saying one or two words, stood up and started to give a lengthy speech about his vision for the market. This is clearly not what we had intended to have happen, and some folks in the circle seemed sort of agitated, and others seemed interested in what he had to say. So, what do you do in that circumstance? So here's another situation. I was helping facilitate a really controversial school facilities planning process, and we had a large community meeting with hundreds of people who came, and we were going to break out into small groups and small classrooms for facilitated conversation. But before that, we were all together in a public space, and one of the local business leaders really didn't like our plan, came to the meeting presumably just to yell at the superintendent. So no matter how many times we tried to politely redirect him, he was intent on confronting the superintendent with the large public audience. It was very loud and very confrontational in that sort of space, right? Again, what do you do? So for a third example, in other situations, I've been in smaller meetings where we're talking about like the culture of a group or some long-standing conflicts, trying to do some generative work about how we want to be together in the future, and one or two members became extremely emotional. Now, emotions are good, right? They're important in dialogue, but sometimes they can be overwhelming. And in this particular case, one of the people was very upset and was talking about how they'd been victimized by another person in the group. So what should we do in these kind of situations, right? This is a challenge that all facilitators face. If this kind of conversation wasn't hard, we wouldn't need facilitators because it would already be easy. But as facilitators, we're supposed to be able to make this kind of stuff more easier to deal with, more manageable. So what do we do? So in our readings today, we talk about, or in this module, we talk about the cycle of facilitation. So when we're facilitating, we go through the cycle where we're observing behavior, we infer kind of what it means, make a decision about whether or not to intervene, right? And sometimes the answer is no, we just kind of let the conversation keep going the way it's going. Other times the answer is yes, we do need to intervene. And some of the recommended things are to describe our observations, to describe our kind of inferences, to test them out, and help the group decide whether or not they want to change their behavior, right? So in these circumstances, you would say, I see this thing happening. I think it means this, but I'm not sure. What do you all think it means? What would you like to do about it, right? This is really giving power back to the group to try to figure out what they want to do. So it's important to unpack that a little bit. So when we're observing, you have to observe at multiple levels. So you observe individual people's actions, but then also interactions between people and patterns. So if you think about the mayor, for example, I was kind of in the moment focused on his action, like he's standing up and talking for a long time where other people weren't talking for a long time and everyone was only supposed to say one or two words. Why does he get to talk so much? And I was irritated about that, right? But then if I look at the interactions, then I can see, are people interested? interested, are not interested, like how are other people interacting toward him, right? And then is this a pattern? Is this something that he does at every single point in the meeting, or was it just this once, and what do I make of that, right? So then you have to infer meaning from the behavior. You kind of say, what is going on here? What does it mean? And does it help or hinder the group's progress? In this case, it wasn't clear to me that it was really hindering, other than the fact that it was taking up time that we hadn't set aside for it. Some people seemed interested in what he had to say, so it was a little more complex. The inference wasn't as straightforward. In the case where the businessman came to yell at the superintendent, I had some pretty strong inferences about that. I was pretty sure that he was angry and he was trying to disrupt our process and that he wanted a public audience. Those were my inferences, right? But you have to be cautious when you're making these observations and inferences, that you want to watch and listen very carefully first and be aware of your own biases and perspectives, right? Like in this case, I had some preconceived notions about what a mayor is like, or what this businessman is like if I know him and he's in my community or something like this, right? So I have to be mindful of my own. And then when you decide to intervene, the first thing you do is describe what you see. So focus on behavior, not intentions. I notice that we're going around the circle. Each person's only saying one or two words, and you're saying a couple more than that, kind of in a funny way, but like, this is what I notice. And then what do people think about that? Or, and often in that kind of circumstance, the mayor will be like, oh, sorry, I'll sit down, right? But describing the behavior rather than intention. So I don't say like, Mayor Joe or whatever, you're talking too much, you need to sit down. It's just saying, doing more of this sort of description. It's also helpful to use active voice, use names and proper nouns, and, not being vague. Some people are speaking more than they're supposed to, right? So trying to be like really specific and concrete, not judgy, but like specific and concrete. And then you want to be reflective, right? Being kind of mindful of the other people's perspectives and thinking about what they're trying to accomplish, what they're trying to do, being sensitive to them, and inviting sort of dialogue, right? This is the kind of asking the group what they want to do. So the description, facilitators often say things like, I noticed that this happened. Did you all notice that too? Or a minute ago, I heard Bob say blah, blah, blah. Is that right? And then you can describe what it means. This seems to be going against the ground rule that we set about everybody speaking the same amount of time, or respecting one another's opinions, or something like this. Or it seems like we're getting away from the topic, and ask the group, is this right? And then invite a response. What does the group want to do? So these are kind of this process is spelled out in some of our readings for this module. You'll notice, though, that in some of our other readings, not every facilitator does this in exactly the same way, right? Facilitators develop different styles, and different examples can require different kind of processes, right? So I've talked through the one with the mayor a little bit. It seemed like at first enough people were interested when I was looking at the interactions that we let them go for a while, and then I did kind of interrupt and make an observation about speaking turns, and he kind of wrapped up after a while, but it was not very confrontational. The second and third examples took more serious intervention. In the case of the angry business leader, we ended up actually removing the superintendent from the stage to take it away from the sort of public intervention, public kind of space, and giving them a chance to talk more offline, so it wasn't as much of a public view, but they still had a chance to talk through their grievances, while the rest of the people were also in small groups, right? And the example of someone becoming very upset during a meeting, so my go-to is to check in with that person to see how they're doing and give them a chance, see what they want to do. Do they want to take a break? Do they want to keep talking this through? Where are they kind of at with it? But we also need to check in with others in the group and sort of test the sort of inferences that we're making. So is this grievance is being talked about? Is this something that's new information that people are shocked by, and do we need to process that? Or is this old news and this comes up in every single meeting? Or is this something that really needs to be dealt with just with two of them rather than the group as a whole? That all of these cases, deciding whether to intervene, and if so, and what to do, requires a lot of work, right? So be mindful of the goals and be mindful of your ground rules. That's a really important starting point. Then remember to observe, infer, describe, and check your inferences with the group to help decide what should happen next. So, although you may not be facilitating large scale community meetings like the ones I described today, you can still use these observation and intervention skills in the difficult conversations that you do facilitate in your own lives. So, hopefully, these examples are meaningful for you. I look forward to seeing your discussions and reflections about these ideas.